All right, hello. Welcome to my channel. This is an educational channel, and we usually focus on out of the way subjects that people don't know anything about, but that I think they're important. They're usually people who spent their whole life working on something, and we're called crackpots and cranks, and were ridiculed in some cases by the establishment, but they kept at it and they put out their work and nobody ever read it. And that doesn't mean that it's not worth reading. And I've found a lot of these little gems or big gems, and one of them is the reciprocal system of theory. And this was a theory that was devised by Dewey B. Larson back in the 20th century. He started his work about 1930 and he died in 1990. So he had about 60 years that he put into this. And he seems to be a very sober and sane character, but he's dismissed, just like all the rest, by the cowards in the scientific community who, you know, uh, attempt to pretend like they care about the truth, whereas they only really care about their own advancement and their status. And, truth comes after that. They care about the truth, but not enough to make themselves look foolish or, put their job on the line or anything like that. I think journalists do about the same thing too. Probably politicians as well, and probably many other fields. They the powers that be set up these firewalls so that certain things you just can't say, or else you'll be branded as somebody who's out of bounds, and then they try to cancel you, and they try to, this is all happening like crazy nowadays, but it happened back in the day as well. So anyway, Dewey B. Larson put together this reciprocal system of theory. The general idea is that we live in a universe of motion, not a universe of matter, not a universe of energy, but a universe of motion. And motion is the relationship between space and time. From there, that was really his first postulate. He has a second postulate that's not as important, but he derived an entire theoretical universe from that, and then he compared it to the universe that the scientists had come up with, mainly through observation and experiment. But there's some invention as well within the scientific establishment. So that's a lot of the places where Larson disagreed. He really said that really 90% of the legacy scientific universe fits in seamlessly with his reciprocal system. It is only the areas of the very small, the very fast, the very large, and the very slow that there are problems. This is very similar to the theory of relativity, where Einstein was making changes on the margins. The Newtonian theory is correct as far as kind of the more visible aspects of the universe, but when you get into these kind of fringe areas, the atomic, realm and the galactic universal realm and high speeds, then the Newtonian system kind of breaks down. And Einstein had one solution for this, and Larson had another. Okay, now we are looking at one of his books that's called Nothing But Motion. This is the first in 3-volume series that he had, called The Structure of the Physical Universe. And this book is primarily on physics, and there's a little bit of organic chemistry as well here. But he also has books on chemistry, astronomy, metaphysics, including religion, philosophy, biology, dream interpretation, economics, and other subjects. It's not a theory as much as it is a system of theory. So it is a general theory, a system that you can plug into any subject. So Larson plugged it into as many subjects as he could, but he was one individual living a finite lifetime, and so there are still all of these other areas that it can be applied. Okay, so we're going to take over here in the second chapter, toward the end of the second chapter, where he was kind of comparing his theory development to making a map. Okay. But this traditional method of map making is not the only way in which a geographical map can be prepared. We may, for instance, devise some photographic system whereby we can secure a representation of an entire area in one operation by a single process. In either case, whether we are offered a map of the traditional kind or a photographic map, we will want to make some tests to satisfy ourselves that the map is accurate before we use it for any important purposes. But because of the difference in the manner in which the maps were produced, the nature of these tests will be altogether different in the two cases. In checking a map of the traditional type, we have no option but to verify each significant feature of the map individually, because aside from a relatively small amount of interrelation, each feature is independent. Verification of the position shown for a mountain in one part of the map does not in any way guarantee the accuracy of the position shown for a river in another part of the map. The only way in which the position shown for the river can be verified is to compare what we see on the map with such other information as may be available. Since these collateral data are often scanty or even entirely lacking, particularly along the frontiers of knowledge, the verification of a map of this kind in either the geographical or scientific field is primarily a matter of judgment, and the final conclusion cannot be more than tentative at best. In the case of a photographic map, on the other hand, each test that is made is a test of the validity of the process, and any verification of an individual feature is merely incidental. If there is even one place where an item that can be definitely seen on the map is in conflict with something that is positively known to be a fact, that is enough to show that the process is not accurate, and it provides sufficient justification for discarding the map in its entirety. But if no such conflict is found, the fact that every test is a test of the process means that each additional test that is made without finding a discrepancy reduces the mathematical probability that any conflict exists anywhere on the map. By making a suitably large number and variety of such tests, the remaining uncertainty can be reduced to the point where it is negligible, thereby definitely establishing the accuracy of the map as a whole. The entire operation of verifying a map of this kind is a purely objective process in which features that can definitely be seen on the map are compared with facts that have been definitely established by other means. One important precaution must be observed in the verification process. A great deal of care must be exercised to make certain of the authenticity of the supposed facts that are utilized for the comparisons. There is no justification for basing conclusions on anything that falls short of positive knowledge. In testing the accuracy of an aerial map, we realize that we cannot justify rejecting the map because the location of a lake indicated on the map conflicts with the location that we think the lake occupies. In this case, it is clear that unless we actually know just where the lake is, we have no legitimate basis on which to dispute the location shown on the map. We also realize that there is no need to pay any attention to items of this kind, those about which we are uncertain. There are hundreds, perhaps thousands of map features about which we do have positive knowledge, far more than enough for purposes of comparison, so that we need not give any consideration to features about which there is any degree of uncertainty. Because the reciprocal system of theory is a fully integrated structure derived entirely by one process, deduction from a single set of premises, it is capable of verification in the same manner as an aerial map. It has already passed such a test. That is, the theoretical deductions have been compared with the observed facts in thousands of individual cases distributed over all major fields of physical science without encountering a single definite inconsistency. These deductions disagree with many currently accepted ideas, to be sure. But in all of these cases, it can be shown that the current views are not positive knowledge. They are either conclusions based on inadequate data, or they are assumptions, extrapolations, or interpretations. As in the analogous case of the aerial map, conflicts with such items, with what scientists think, are meaningless. The only conflicts that are relevant to the test of the validity of the theoretical system are conflicts with what scientists know. Thus, while recognition of human fallibility prevents asserting that every conclusion purported to be reached by application of this theory is authentic and therefore correct, it can be asserted that the reciprocal system of theory is capable of producing the right answers if it is properly applied. And to the extent that the development of the consequences of the postulates of the theory has been correctly carried out, the theoretical structure thus derived is a true and accurate representation of the actual physical universe. Okay, that is the end of chapter 2. Okay, now we're going to get into chapter 3, which is called reference systems. And so now, just a little bit of background. Now, if you have a universe of motion, as is posited by the reciprocal system, with a universe of motion, that means that motion is the background, that there is always motion. Okay, so there's really no zero. Okay, most measurements we take from zero. So if you've got you got something that you're trying to measure, you're going to find the home base or the zero spot, and you're going to measure how far away from zero that is. Whether it's a speed or whether it's a distance or whether it's a time. You start with time zero, and then you say, well, 3 hours from now. 3 hours from now, well, then that's, now is basically your time zero. Or 30 feet from here is your space zero. Or 50 miles an hour. 50 miles an hour means 50 miles an hour more than zero. But in Larson's system, since it's a universe of motion, you already have this background motion, and so you can't really measure from zero. You're measuring from something that's already moving. The thing that's already moving is the de facto zero, and you're measuring from there. Larson calls that a displacement, and so that's kind of what he's going to be getting into in this chapter on reference systems. We'll start right here. As indicated in the preceding chapter, the concept of a universe of motion has to be elaborated to some extent before it is possible to develop a theoretical structure that will describe that universe in detail. The additions to the basic concept must take the form of assumptions or postulates, a term more commonly applied to the fundamental assumptions of a theory. Because even though the additional specifications obviously do apply to the particular universe of motion in which we live, there does not appear to be adequate justification for contending that they necessarily apply to a possible universe of motion. It has already been mentioned that we are postulating a universe composed of discrete units of motion, but this does not mean that the motion proceeds in a series of jumps. This basic motion is progression, in which the familiar progression of time is accompanied by a similar progression of space. Completion of one unit of the progression is followed immediately by initiation of another without interruption. As an analogy, we may consider a chain. Although the chain exists only in discrete units or links, it is a continuous structure, not a mere juxtaposition of separate units. Whether or not the continuity is a matter of a logical necessity is a philosophical question that does not need to concern us at this time. There are reasons to believe that it is, in fact, a necessity. But if not, we will introduce it into our definition of motion. In any event, it is part of the system. The extensive use of the term progression in application to the basic motions with which we are dealing in the initial portions of this work is intended to emphasize this characteristic. Another assumption that will be made is that the universe is three-dimensional. In this connection, it should be realized that all of the supplementary assumptions that were added to the basic concept of a universe of motion in order to define the essential properties of that universe were no more than tentative at the start of the investigation that ultimately led to the development of the reciprocal system of theory. Some such supplementary assumptions were clearly required, but neither the number of assumptions that would have to be made nor the nature of the individual assumptions was clearly indicated by existing knowledge of the physical universe. The only feasible course of action was to initiate the investigation on the basis of those assumptions, which seemed to have the greatest probability of being correct. If any wrong assumptions were made, or if some further assumption were required, the theoretical development would, of course, encounter insurmountable difficulties very quickly, and it would then be necessary to get back and modify the postulates and try again. Fortunately, the original postulates passed this test, and the only change that has been made was to drop some of the original assumptions that were found to be deducible from the others and therefore superfluous. No further physical postulates are required, but it is necessary to make some assumptions as to the mathematical behavior of the universe. Here, our observations of the existing universe do not give us guidance of as definite a character as was available in the case of the physical properties. But there is a set of mathematical principles which, until very recent times, was generally regarded as almost self-evident. The main body of scientific opinion is now committed to the belief that the true mathematical structure of the universe is much more complex. But the assumption that it conforms to the older set of principles is the simplest assumption that can be made. Following the rule laid down by William of Ockham, this assumption was therefore made for the purpose of the initial investigation. No modifications have since been found necessary. The complete set of assumptions that constitutes the fundamental postulates of the theory of a universe of motion can be expressed as follows. Okay, now Larson is going to lay down his two fundamental postulates. Now, he mentioned that really for the second postulate, he's saying that, what he's postulating is the simplest, way of going about it, but that there has been a trend in science to tend toward a more complex picture. And he just really uses Occam's razor, keep it simple, as his justification for arriving at his second fundamental postulate, which he basically knows that it's limited, but that it's going to do the job for him. But eventually, Dr. Bruce Perret came along and really, I believe, demolished the second fundamental postulate. Didn't demolish it, just amended it. It's limited. It doesn't mean that it's wrong. It just is limited. And when you try to extend the reciprocal system into certain areas, that limitation comes up. Larson didn't really encounter it, but Perret did, and Perret felt the need to make that correction. Okay, now the first fundamental postulate, though, is the key. First fundamental postulate: the physical universe is composed entirely of one component, motion, existing in 3 dimensions, in discrete units, and with 2 reciprocal aspects, space and time. Okay, so that's it. That's what Larson bases his whole deductive development of the universe on. The physical universe is composed entirely of one component, motion, existing in 3 dimensions, in discrete units, and with 2 reciprocal aspects, space and time. Okay, the second fundamental postulate, which I was talking about that is limited, is that the physical universe conforms to the relations of ordinary commutative mathematics. Its primary magnitudes are absolute, and its geometry is Euclidean. Now, the Euclidean geometry, that is, from the Greek mathematician Euclid, from about the 300 BC, and that is XYZ coordinates. Okay, your graph, your 3-dimensional graph, XYZ coordinates, and 3 dimensions of that, and Perret rejects that and replaces it with projective geometry, which is a more dynamic geometry that is more geared toward motion, of which Euclidean geometry is just a subset. So Perret is not rejecting Euclidean geometry. He's just showing how it's limited. Okay, now we will leave it right there with the 2 postulates. And now tomorrow we will get into how Larson uses these postulates and whatever else he has to say about them and how he plugs them into reference systems. All right, well, thank you for tuning in, and come back tomorrow. Have a great day.